2020, 2021. And what I'd like to do is take a few minutes to talk about the budget, sort of walk through some slides, some visuals that I have here, and then we'll go deeper into the school start time piece, sort of how that all fits, and certainly open to conversation, questions, discussion, all of that along the way. The budget process itself, well, first, members of the Board of Education, administration, of course, a school district budget is a lot more than just numbers on a page. The budget itself is the way that we align and allocate our resources in order to meet our strategic priorities as a school district. You can learn a lot about a district even by sort of going back a few years and doing a forensic analysis on where they've invested and where they've placed their resources. It is a value statement about what's important to you as a district, as a town. And so all of the folks here, plus all of our principals, all of our program managers, everybody that's involved in the system to some degree or another is involved in helping us to develop what I'm going to talk about in the budget. It's sort of a top-down and bottom-up process where we start by sort of laying out the process and the procedures we're going to follow, and then our administrators and cost center folks take it to their people. They will talk to teachers, and department chairs, and other program leaders, and sort of develop their proposals. Then we meet again with all of them and work through sort of what those proposals are versus where it needs, and make some decisions that ultimately results in the superintendent's proposed budget for the Board of Ed. There are lots of meetings that happen before this. There's lots of meetings that are going to happen after this. And so it is about a collaborative effort, both with internally and externally. And so the internal work, really, a lot of that happens right up through the 6th, which was my presentation of the superintendent's budget to the Board of Education. And then from there, we continue to have other meetings, so you can see them all there. With the Board of Ed, we've had met the day after, the 7th, with the PTC from the elementary schools. We've had meetings with staff. We've had other conversations as we continue to go. The Board of Ed will meet tomorrow morning, and part of that is to share with them results of the conversations and feedback that we've received along and throughout the process, and for them to really question, again, different dimensions and elements of the budget. We have 2 Board of Education members here. Thank you, Julie and Katrina, for joining us. Not to call you out. You don't have to sit in the front row. But Board of Ed will make that decision on the 21st. And then it's no longer the superintendent's budget proposal, it becomes the Board of Education's proposed budget. And then we start going through our town meetings. You see the Board of Selectmen, who really focuses on capital, not really operating. We'll talk about operating a little with them, but their domain is the capital purchases and improvements. Then we go to the Board of Finance, starting in February, right in the beginning of March, and then the Town Council, which ends with that final vote on April 2nd. All in all, there's 17 of them sort of formalish kind of budget meetings as we go through the process, plus lots and lots more of informal meetings in my office, maybe talking with this person or that person who might have specific questions about something that's in the budget. I know the Board of Ed members are always sort of talking with community members and others about it, doing feedback, sharing it. So the idea is to be as inclusive as possible as we go through this entire process. I mentioned that I'm moving very quickly. I can even go quicker because I know we're in the morning and time constraints, so I will do that. But I mentioned that a budget is a document that really reflects the values, beliefs, goals of a school district. And so we do always want to think about what are our sort of 5 overarching goals that we have as a district. These goals have been consistent through the years. And what we do annually is operationalize them with objectives and indicators that the administration sort of works up a draft, we bring it to the Board of Education. They read it, review it, edit it, provide feedback, and through this iterative process, it then gets approved over the summer by the board, and then we operationalize it as we go into the new year. So we do this annually, and it really does keep us moving in the right direction of those larger goals. And as we approach the budget season, we create a document called Budget Assumptions and Related Priorities. And we take the goals and objectives, roll that into language and direction and focus for our resources so that the budget proposal that we bring forward, we ensure that it is aligned with our strategic priorities as articulated for those goals. Make sense? In doing that, we're constantly looking at this balance around excellence and efficiency. Right? What our goal is, and the goal in all public sectors as we develop our public schools, do this work, we want to maintain a service delivery model that provides excellent educational opportunities for every single one of our kids. That's first and foremost, that's our goal. We want to provide that for every child in our care. And we want to do it in as efficient and effective way as possible. So we're sort of balancing. When these things go out of balance, it can be very difficult throughout a budget process. As I'm going to show you, I think we have really struck that balance over the last few years, and probably before my time as well, I'm sure. And we're delivering excellent results, and we continue to find ways to identify and capitalize on efficiencies that are there. So some of the excellent results, which of course all of you know, I'm not going to certainly read all this to you, but you can see that excellence in our athletics. And handouts, I apologize, I didn't have enough when I came in just because of copiers and all this stuff. So Copy Center is going to bring some more up for us. And I will put this online as well if you're interested to see it. But athletics is one dimension of our program, right? And so we see excellence in athletics. So, lots of things here to be proud of, including the fact we won the Turkey Bowl for the last 3 years. But like things like our basketball team winning the state championship too. So team accomplishments, but also individual accomplishments. Some of our kids in track and field and swimming and other things have really distinguished themselves regionally, statewide, as outstanding performers in a variety of different ways. Excellence also in the arts. When we look at our visual performing arts program, we think about art, music, and theater. And again, it's group awards for students in teamwork and collaboration in our theater, individual accomplishments for our students in the arts and in music. This year we had students in band, choir, and orchestra be invited to participate in the Western Regional Music Ensembles, which is an invite only, and they practice with them, and then they perform statewide. It's a wonderful opportunity. Again, I think it shows the quality, the depth, the breadth of our program for kids. The opportunities we provide kids are outstanding as well. We know that we want to engage our students in our programs in a variety of different ways, not just as kids sitting in the classroom, but have them connect to the school. I mentioned the athletics before, over 70% of our students here in the high school are involved in one or more sport. We've got hundreds of kids that are in BPA. We've got hundreds of kids that are in our clubs and different activities, things that we have. And sometimes those are all the same kids. The 70% unique students, I think, is really powerful. And that is, you don't have a point of comparison, so when you think about it, that is a significant, it's a very high rate of participation. And that is in large part, I think, certainly to our kids in the active, engaged community, but also to sort of the vision and direction that our athletic director has taken the program through the years, which is to try to expand as much as possible to provide as many opportunities for kids. And that's through the support of the Board of Ed and support of the community through the All Sports Booster Club in sort of helping us to fund coaches to have enough opportunities for those kids. So we've had things like 2 teams to some months, things like that, where just to give kids more opportunities to get them out there. They want to do it, we want to try to find ways for them to do it. So excellence in some co-curricular and other pieces around our school day, but also within the school day. And it's really important. I'll move through this again relatively quickly, but we look at the Smarter and Balanced assessments, which is our grades 3 through 8. And what we found last year, once again, is that we were at the top of the dirt, top of the state, in both English language arts and in math. And that's sort of the aggregate of all of them. If you go a little deeper and you look at sort of grade level by grade level across, and I use the term DIRT because that's our demographic reference group, and these are the towns that are in our DRG, which is a terrible acronym. Again, you see here that out of the 6 grades, 5 of the 6 were number 1 in our DIRT, and I think the other one we're right at the top. Same goes with mathematics. As we look across the area in our demographic reference group there, we do points of comparison. But we also know that these scores do vacillate. Some years they'll go up a little, down a little. When you're talking about maybe you're number 1 by a 0.3, right? That might be 2 kids. So these things are. We want to be careful with comparisons because the statistical significance may or may not be there. So when we look at also what trends over time and growth. And so we see from 2016 to 2019, growth in our English language arts, growth in our mathematics. So that's us continuing to work on our curriculum, our program, our instruction, our assessment, and working with our kids as they move up through the system. So the consistent performance, I think, is important to know. At the high school side, we look at our SAT. This is our school day SAT. And again, our students perform very well. They're at the top and second and third with Darian and our mathematics. So again, our students continue to perform well as they move through the grades. Okay. Lots of things here. I'm not going to go through all of them certainly, but we identified there's so much data in high school that you can use to look at, to reflect on, and what have you. So these are some of the data points that we use. Significant. There's lots of things here that are significant. But again, looking at the our participation in advanced placement courses, the opportunities that we've given to children through the years. Back in 2014, we had 22 courses that students could take. We've expanded the program to get up to 27. The idea being that if the student wants to challenge him or herself by trying an advanced class, we want to make that opportunity available for him. And again, you see the participation across the board. All of this comes together. Thank you. Oh, gentlemen. Of course, externally, so these are internal measures, things that we look at, comparisons we make. Certainly, externally, we've been recognized regionally, statewide, nationally as a premier school district. Each of our different schools, different levels. Niche.com is one of these systems that does this. It's but there are many of them out there. Of course, I always caution against ranking systems. I don't like them. I think that they find a few narrow metrics and use that to suit some other kind of purpose. But generally, I think that the richness of our students' educational experience is really what I want to capture for our kids. But we certainly are recognized as a premier school district. At the same time, I mentioned the excellence and efficiency. On the efficiency side of the equation, the Connecticut puts out a measure each year called NCEP, Net Current Expenditures per Pupil. And we would call that per pupil expenditure, generally. That's sort of what do we spend per kid for the operations. And now this is an operational measure. This is what does it take to run your school district. If you've been engaged with this or seen some of the comments about debt service and all of that, that's a different discussion. Debt service can swing millions of dollars in any given year when what rolls onto debt, what rolls off the debt, all of those things. And we, as a school district, we're not directly involved with that or those decisions. We are directly involved with this and these decisions, in that this is what it takes to run our school district. And so the state develops this NCEP number, which is net current expenditures per pupil. And then they also have something called ANGLIC, which is Adjusted Equalized Net Grand List. And the ANGLIC, so you have net current expenditures, and then you have ANGLIC, which is your ability to pay, essentially. That's your wealth ranking in the state. So they equalize the grand list, they divide it by the number of people in the town, come up with a number. Greenwich is number 1, New Canaan is number 2, and then it goes to down list, whatever. And this is all publicly available information. So this chart specifically is just meant to show that our rank for our per pupil expenditures places us 27th in the state. Our ANGLIC, sort of that ability to pay, places us in 2nd in the state. So what this means is that we are spending less than 26 other towns on the education of their children per child. We are giving the performance that puts us at the very top of the state. And again, our ability to pay puts us there at the number 2. And so the idea, again, is around efficiency. Are we running an efficient operation? I would point to this to say, yeah, I believe that we are. Okay. And again, here's some of the different comparisons around that. How are we doing it? Is an important question. There's ways that you can bring your costs down, but not doing it in smarter, efficient ways that are detrimental to a school system. So here's some of the ways that we do it that we believe our results show has helped us to moderate sort of cost drivers without having an impact on our programs, the opportunities for kids. So things like we in-housed our printing last year, saved us significant money, continues to. Maintenance, instead of having generalists on our maintenance staff, we've got 6 people who are our maintenance staff. We've started hiring about 4 years ago, hiring specialists. So through attrition, when somebody retires or leaves, if it's a generalist or whoever it is, we'll hire a plumber, an electrician, an HVAC specialist. Those kinds of somebody. We just hired an electrician with extensive experience with solar. So, we're doing these solar installations over the next couple of years. So now we have somebody on staff who can get directly involved with doing that work with us. And now we can save some money on consultant fees and other things. So we try to be strategic about it. But we hire these specialists who then do the work for us instead of us having to call in an outside group to do that level 1 kind of repair. So it saves us money, it saves us time on the quickness that they're able to, the rapidity that they can use to get to the issue. But also there's a pride of ownership in that, right? So they know if they don't do something right, they're right back at it the next day. And all their colleagues are saying, what happened, why didn't you fix this? There's like those kinds of pieces versus hiring a company that can come in and then run out somewhere else. If they get it wrong, they'll be hired back tomorrow and pay more money. So there's that piece. We've been in-housing some skilled services, certainly in special education, some other areas. Again, that's the ownership, it's the relationship that they establish with the students and the families they're working with. And then we've had for years an in-house special ed transportation system. Those are the white vans that you see. That system actually saves us significant money because although it's a lot more work to do your own routing and scheduling and to take care of the vans and manage all of that and have the team here that does it, we're able to capture efficiencies with that you couldn't do if you had to outsource that. And I was surprised to learn that not many districts, very, very few actually, took the step years ago proactively to in-house the transportation. Because it's an expensive thing to get started, but once it's in place, and it's difficult because you have to scale up, you have to hire people to figure out the routes and do all that, but once it's in place, year after year after year, you wind up saving money. So I know that people look at the white van sometimes and say, my gosh, what are we spending on that? Well, we're spending a lot less than we would be if we had ed advance and other vans driving our kids all over town. And again, you have people who form relationships with our kids and our families over time that really provide that level of service excellence that people come to expect. So it's I'm sorry, I'm trying not to fall into my whole script. But another thing that we've been doing over the last couple of years is really identifying environmentally friendly and cost-effective things that we can do with the district. I mentioned solar before. We are looking at putting solar out in the building we just completed south recently, and that's generating over 70% of the power required to run that building, which I think is pretty amazing, 70%. More than that. We're looking at east, west, and Saks over the course of this upcoming year. And then we're going to look at the high school as we do it. We're lining it up with the roof replacements that we're doing. Because it doesn't make sense to put solar panels on a roof that has to be replaced in a year or two. But generally, this will all help to bring down our consumption, our needs off the grid, and it brings down our cost. So it's environmentally friendly and financially a good decision. The natural gas, when we moved over, now 4/5 of our schools, 4 of our 5 schools are on natural gas. That has helped us. And we are looking at what are we going to do with West next year. That oil tank is at the end of its useful life. We check it monthly, it's okay, it's a fiberglass tank, but it does have to come out, or we have to either abandon it in place or remove it. So we're hoping not to go back to diesel. So what we'd like to do is hopefully get the line run up, and we're working with Eversource to do that. But if that doesn't work, we'll look at propane or another option. Because we've been using propane now with our entire bus fleet, and we've had great success with that. So again, it burns cleanly, it's less expensive, it's quiet, and it starts regardless of the temperature. Because with diesel, when it was going to be a cold night, you sometimes had to let the buses run overnight because they wouldn't have started in the morning. But with propane, it's under pressure, and the way that it works is as long as it's not colder than negative 48 degrees below Fahrenheit as a temperature, it's going to start. So we're not hitting that temperature. That helps. If we do, we're not going to be in school. We're talking about cogeneration, so we're actually looking at using natural gas to generate electricity at a couple of our spot buildings that have higher power needs, the high school and Saks. And so by using natural gas to generate some power and do that, you get the return of lower energy costs. Again, better for the environment because burning natural gas is much better than the way that they're generating power for us today. And again, it saves us a little bit of money. So those are big costs. So that doesn't change the kids' experience in their classrooms, right? If there's solar panels on the roof or not, it doesn't change their opportunities, it doesn't change challenges, but it brings down our cost drivers. So it allows us to continue to do the important work that we're doing, within the budget. And so that's when we talk about cost drivers. Those are sometimes the big things that they're operational. So we can continue to manage those really tightly. it helps ensure that we have the resources to do the things that matter to each of our kids. Little things that maybe you've done some of this at your house. Like I have, so my in-laws stay with us sometimes, and they always leave the lights on, so I put all LED lights downstairs where they stay. It's easy to we did that in our schools, right? Our elementaries, we put all LED lights in. And now we're looking at the high school and the middle school. Now, it saves me a couple of pennies, it's no big deal. But because of the scale of what we're talking about here, this could be $15,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year that we save just by swapping out the light bulbs. You know, moving away from the compact fluorescents where you have into the LEDs. And that's at each location. Like this stuff, it adds up because of the scale of it. Little things like load balancing. So, a school this size, power goes down sometimes. South loses power recently, pretty regularly. Sometimes I get a call at 2 in the morning and say, right, Saks is out of power. And then by 4:30 it's back magically. And so nobody hopefully has to wake up and know that other than me and a few people. But what happens when it goes off and it comes back on is all the equipment comes back on at once. And when that happens, the power company charges us based on our maximum draw from the grid over the course of like a year and a half. Because they have to reserve space on the grid for us to be able to get that much power at our peak level. So they set our rate based on that maximum draw. Okay, a little more technical than you need to know. But here's the thing, for not too much money and a little bit of work, we put an electronic system in place at our larger buildings so that when that happens, this does happen, and these things come back on, it actually cycles them. So this one comes up first, and then this one, and we prioritize it, and we prioritize the freezers in the kitchen before we do the burner on a different spot. We do those kinds of things so that the peak need doesn't exceed a certain level, so our rates don't ratchet up. Little things, but these are things like doesn't change anybody's life, but it saves our district money every year. So those are the kinds of things we focus on that operationally because we know the tighter we do this, the more efficiently we do this, the better we can do it. Okay. So in this budget, again, it's the excellence and efficiency, looking at a couple of different things. I'm going to, again, we have the handouts if anyone would like to see them. Top line, or the bottom line? For the overall increase, year to year, Board of Ed's budget is a 1.47% increase. Now, since I presented the budget on Monday night, last week on the 6th, a few of our surrounding towns have presented their budgets as well. Westport, I believe, came in at a 5.78. Darayen's at a 3.48. Weston's at a 5.5. I don't know if anyone else has publicly come out yet, but I know some others are really having a hard time kind of getting into the fives for their budget as they're trying to piece that all together. So we feel really good about our 1.47. And in part, it's it's driven by the efficiencies that we just talked about. And then I'll tell you, there's another significant efficiency I'll talk about in a minute. But we're in a good place. And as we look at this, as far as an overall budgetary need for the town moving forward, that's part of that. And one of the great things about it is we're able to resource those things that are our strategic priorities that have been identified and discussed. We talked about budget assumptions and related priorities. So those things are sort of accounted for and resourced in this budget proposal. There's lots of ways you can look at a school district budget. I think I've probably looked at it in all of them. But one way is to compare what they call cost centers, what we call cost centers, which is each school would be a cost center. Health benefits is a cost center. The athletics, EPA, curriculum, different ways that we kind of group things. This isn't the best way to analyze the school district budget, so I'm going to move off this a second. The point here simply is you look at the balance between our schools, and you see how that allocation of resources is really very thoughtfully done. Around our elementaries, if West looks a little smaller, because their enrollment is a little bit smaller, right? So it balances out in Saks and our high school. Dave and Bill can talk to each other about the 0.02 difference. They do. But do you see that now? 81% of our budget goes to salary and benefits. And schools are what they are because of the people that are in them. We have about 4,200 kids or so. Okay, we'll get to the numbers later. 4,174. We need adults, we need folks around to work with those kids, to do the work that happens in the classroom. We need people to drive them to school, we need people to feed them in the cab, we need our teachers, we need our TAs, we need our secretaries, we need our administrators. Like, you know, it's a people business, this is what we do. And so 81% is the salaries and benefits combined, which is driven directly by our enrollment. So the enrollment here in town, since we put this together to look at it from 15, 16, again, we use the DERG as a comparison here. We've been, over that entire period of time, we're 71 student change, so, you know, a little over 1.5%. I would say over a 5-year period, that's pretty stable for a district this our size. And so we're able to have some consistency within our budget. We had a surprise this year with our elementary enrollment in the kindergarten, you may have known, where our projection had us at about 250 kids. And we had 308 actually register and come in the door. Kindergarten is the toughest for lots of reasons, as you can imagine. So, you know, we look at trends, we do the best we can to predict. When that happens, we figure it out, right? We move stuff around, we try to do what we have to do in order to make it all work. The enrollment over time for the last 10 years, again, 10 years ago we were at 4032, and 2022 we're projected to be at 4098. I think that's pretty consistent. That's you know, we're working within those. The 2019 was 4172. Well, what's more important is sort of the grade level distribution. So again, I'm sorry, your eyes on place go. But we look at the grade levels and where the kids break out according to those grade levels. And then actually the elementary level, we have to go another level deeper to look at where they are in each school. So our decisions are based upon and guided by our class size guidelines that you know, tell us 16 to 20 at the youngest grades, and then grade 4 through 8, we look at 20 to 24. And then the high school varies because of the program and the things that students are expected to doing. But again, year to year, so this is when you move the kids up in the grades. But again, they are projecting in our kindergarten 258, and we had 308 come in this year with a 250 projection, so we're going to keep an eye on it. There was one group that I spoke with last year, before we had the actual numbers, who predicted that the projection was wrong when it was coming in at 250. And they said, it's going to be higher than that. Like, you need to plan higher. I said, I can't. I have to go by the projections and build around that, but I'll remember what you're saying. Any guess on what group that was? Realtors. Because I speak to them every fall, we go, we talk about things going on, and it was realtors who said, and to a person, I don't know if you were there, but they really said, look, that projection is wrong, it's going to be low, and they were right. So I did not let them prognosticate on next year's. You're 1 for 1, we'll keep that. So what are the drivers of the budget? You know, as we look at it, first and foremost, if we're 81% salary and benefits, then that's going to be a driver. So salary increases, contractual increases, transportation increases. The you know, we do have a budget line for out-of-district tuition, grade progression, which is when teachers move. They have step movement, right? So each year they move up a step, and then if they earn additional degrees or credits that reach certain benchmarks, then they can move in the grid. So they sort of move to the right. So they start off, a brand new teacher right out of school would start off on a BA step 1, right? A bachelor's step 1. And then they might, or next year, be step 2, step 3, and then maybe they get their master's, and then they move over into a new column where there's also that. So we keep a pretty tight eye on that, or close eye on that, because we know in advance when teachers are moving on the grid. So that number's generally very much spot on. And then right now we have an interim principal for us over at South, who's doing a great job. We are posting to look to hire a long-term principal over there. And if that does come through, then right now the principal that's there is retired, so he can only earn a certain amount, so that we would true up that salary because he's collecting his retirement. So you can't do both anymore. Used to be able to. You can't do that anymore. People weren't happy when that changed. Some of the initiatives in this budget. So I mentioned, it's more than we certainly look to maintain the excellence that we have. We look to how can we make things a little bit better. What can we add and what can we do? Biggest, right at the top, aligning schedules to optimize learning. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. That obviously, I like to think that you're all here for Brian and budget, but I know it's really the us. Okay. Or at least part of it. The high school is looking to add a social studies teacher. We've expanded opportunities for kids in discipline areas, and the social studies enrollment has continually increased each year. Plus, high school is getting a little bit bigger, year after year after year. So we added a little world language last year. We had a little science last year, but now the need is showing itself to be in social studies, based on that enrollment and based on the course selection. See some of the other things there. Oh, I didn't fix Huddle. It's HUDL. It's not HUDL. Sorry, Jim. But that's a really cool initiative that we're doing. I'll talk about it. So let's go to the big number that was there, right? And all of what I just showed you and those efficiencies, all of that, all sort of gets mixed and mashed together to give you that 1.47% year-over-year change in requests. But school start times has been in the news and in the conversation for a good number of years. And we have, as a district, we started looking at this back in April of 2017, when there was a lot of conversation going on in Greenwich, and they had made a decision to change. We started to take a look at it. The other towns have been looking at it in different ways and different things, whatever. This is just, I didn't even mean to print this page, it's just more of a reminder for me on transition. So as we looked at this, over the course of the 2.5 years or however long, we identified, we created different scenarios, right? And these scenarios were really guided by a whole bunch of different kind of thoughts and ideas, and feedback things we got. But ultimately, before we did that, we looked at the research, and we went to a couple of conferences, spoke with people who have been in districts, who made some changes. We looked at Palo Alto, for instance, and looked at different places, and learned about the science around this to say, is this something that we need to look at? And as we learned about it, we said, yeah, this is something that board, community, all we should be looking at, thinking about, talking about to see, is there a better way, right? I guess one of the drivers is sort of looking at our current system, right? Can we do this better? We're a district, we're committed to continuous improvement. We want to always see if there are better ways to do what we're doing on behalf of kids. And when we started to sort of look at that, we came to realize, or to really sort of call to attention, the current system that we have now isn't great for all kids. We've got, the earliest pickup right now is 6:28 for a kid in 7th grade, in 7 through 12, 6:28. And more kids get picked up from 6:30, 6:31, 6:32, 6:40, as we go through. And that's the 7 through 12 group, which means that for a child who is getting picked up at 6:28, that child would be doing that for 6 years if he or she's taking the bus, each of those years. But we're thinking that maybe we can do better than that. We'll do better. So we continued to learn and to look and to research and to talk to people or whatever. And the board, and every second meeting of every month, I was sharing out progress with the board, and we were hearing from some community members around some different thoughts and different things. But said, okay, so if we were to do something different, what would it look like? And that's where we started sort of creating scenarios and prototypes and running focus groups. And we had a consultant come down. About a year ago, we were talking, I presented to the board, maybe a year and a half, some different scenarios from a group called TAS, Transportation Advisory Services, where they shared some different scenarios. We continued to kind of bounce that around and talk about that with community, with staff, with others, to get more feedback. We went and met with staff in every building, talked to them about those scenarios, took that feedback back, took back feedback from others, and kept sort of thinking about what if we did this, what if we did that. We're very lucky. We have an in-house transportation director, Roy Balder, who does all the scheduling for our white buses and also sort of works with DATCO. Every time we come up with some crazy idea, he would take it and go and spend about 20 hours a day for a week and tell us what that would mean. What would it mean for kids? Like, when would the earliest pickup be? When would the latest pickup be? How would it work? What about dismissal? How many buses would we need? How would it run? So Roy, over the last, year and a half or so, has really been kind of running our system well and building out all kinds of models for us to understand this. So as we were doing this, there was always something wrong. There's nothing perfect. We looked at a 2-tier model and said, gosh, if we were to do a 2-tier model, we would need an hour in between the 2 tiers, And so when somebody would start at 8, somebody would start at, well, and the research says nobody should start before 8:30 in the late adolescence. So if we put the older tier at 8:30, we'd have to meet an hour, so the other tier would have to go at either 9:30 or 7:30. So how do we sort of position this? Does a 2-tier system work? And felt like, gosh, doesn't seem like it works, right? Because if you have to go, if you use 8:30 as your time, because I certainly wouldn't, as we're thinking about scenarios and proposals, bring forward one that didn't conform to the research that we've been talking about, reading through and understanding about the 8:30. So we sort of bandied that around a little bit, like, could this work, could it work? And said, this is not. It doesn't really. And if you start at 9:30 for a group of kids, those kids at the end of the day wouldn't be getting home probably till 4:45. And that 9:30, I already feel guilty when I call a 2-hour delay with a 9:05 start. So how guilty would I feel if I call a 2-hour delay and kids don't start till 11:30? Like there's all, but it's not a great time. It doesn't seem right. And certainly we wouldn't want, why go to a 2-tier and still start at 7:30? And you need that hour. So worked around that. And the cost on a 2-tier is, it would be about 1.8 million or so. So we looked at that and sort of ruled it out because of how it would be built, like sort of the need for an hour in between because of all the buses, and the research as to where do you put the other the other start time. And then, but this is the kind of like gymnastics we were doing as we're trying to do it. And I said, why don't we try to just focus on our purpose? Right? So let's start with why. Why are we doing this? And the why was, look, right now we've got kids who are getting up 5:30 in the morning, 5:15 in order to be out at the bus stop at 6:30. In order to get to school, they start at 7:30 in the morning. And it's just not, we can do better than that. We said, so we need to look at the research, we need to look at what people are saying about adolescent sleep cycles and what have you. So we said, all right, so what if one of our guiding principles is 8:30 for adolescents? What if we just started there? So, but that's not enough because we want to make sure we're not disadvantaging others. So what if we also said, we didn't want any student to be picked up in the dark. We don't want kids waiting for the bus in the dark. And we don't want them getting home in the dark. Can we make that work? Can we do it so that we have to understand that we need 45 minutes between the tiers on a 3-tier system, or an hour between the tiers on a 2-tier system. So the 45 minutes, and we've tried so hard, this is part of what was making Roy Waldron crazy. How can we shrink that 45 minutes? What can we do to shorten that? Because if we can shorten that, then, because at 8 o'clock, people are saying we shouldn't start elementary before 8 o'clock. But what happens, everything gets pushed out. We can't, maybe when we build this and we do something, maybe we find a couple of minutes, but it's a big maybe. So we have to be true to what the data is telling us. The data is telling us it's 45 minutes. Some of my colleagues in some other districts that have made little changes, promised things that they really couldn't deliver on, and they're right back at it. So I'm really working hard. We're all really working hard to avoid doing that. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So we need 45 minutes. There is a difference between bus times and start times for kids, right? It's certainly the start time does drive to a degree how long kids are on buses. But as we learned when we were looking at this, where we position the buses on the tiers makes a difference. I'll get to that in a second. When I mentioned before, we were just kind of talking, bouncing around scenarios with staff, with community. One of the things we heard time and again was sort of that elementary student stamina in the afternoon. That they get tired. It's a long day for them. That the teachers see it in their classrooms, and we looked at the master schedules even. Those principals look to concentrate the academics in the morning, do other things in the afternoon, because it's a long day for kids to do that. So is there a way to sort of pick that up? And then the other thing is, and we looked at this really closely, we actually did focus groups on this here in this room. What could we wanted to try to have SACs all on one tier. We'd love that. It's one school, one community, can we pull that off? But you can't. And really the biggest problem around it is the limitations of the facility. You can't get more than maybe 15 buses or so, 70 buses on those grounds at any given time. But if you're going to do the whole school at once, you've got 1,300 kids. You need all of our buses. So you'd have to do a staggered dismissal. So the day would end, and it would take 25 minutes for dismissal every day to happen. So that's It's just not. And if you do SAC, if you try to put SACs all together, they have to go on the last tier because it would take so long for the buses to do what they have to do. We couldn't expect them to be available for another run with kids. So by putting them on the last tier and making this long dismissal, you don't have kids getting home before 5 o'clock, for some kids. So it just, you can't do it, bottom line. So these are some of the constraints and the drivers and the things that we were trying to sort of get to the scenario itself, which is how we arrived at. Oh, and these are just competing things. Yes, okay. Here's how we arrived at our scenario that was shared last week that people have been providing feedback. So the scenario that's being discussed and considered meets these sort of the goals that we outlined as we move across. Again, we probably put together 14 different scenarios to talk about, to look at, prototype, what would it mean for kids, how would it work. When we look at this one, we think this one feels strong of all scenarios. Essentially, we're going to make a change to our school start times. I put this forward as the most advantageous one for us. Okay. It does have our 3 elementaries at 7:45. So you might be doing in your head, well, gosh, if kids right now are waiting for the bus at 6:28, and that's a 7:30 start. If you move 15 minutes, then aren't they just going to be waiting for the bus, at 6:45? How is that any better? I'll show you in a minute why it is. But what happens with our elementaries is the earliest pickup actually shifts to 7:06. So what happens, because we have 3 neighborhood elementary schools, those rides to the school in the morning are much shorter than they are for the high school or for SACs. So the high school SACs service kids the whole 125 miles of roads. And trust me, kids live on every far corner of the town. I have those maps too. That takes a long time for those buses to bring the kids in. But we have 3 elementary schools. They're more neighborhood schools. Those bus rides are shorter. So the first child picked up in this scenario, as we build it, would be 7:06. 50% of kids would be picked up after 7:23. So and that's where there's a difference between start time and bus time. And I've said publicly, it's not when school starts, it's when kids have to leave to go to school. It's when they have to get up in the morning that we're really trying to figure out there, trying to solve for, right? So that's a significant difference. So when you have your high school, your middle school as your first tier, it's going to those are the longest bus rides, which you back it up and creates the earliest time that kids have to start getting on buses. It aligns all 3 of those elementaries. It's aligned with research around our adolescents and the best time for them. And then with SACs, so we're able to, by having 5, 6 as the last tier, it's only 2 grade levels, so it's a small tier. And since we're taking the kids home, we'll have excess capacity buses. So those buses will be fewer kids on them, which means shorter bus rides. So they'll be more than 50% drop off by 4:10 in the afternoon. And everybody's home by 4:27. Again, this is a scenario prototype. We know you miss a light, you're going to be 4:28. We know how this, but it is all factored in. But this is, you got to use the numbers that the system generates as we look at it. We also were thinking about, gosh, is it light? Is there a light at 7:06 in the morning? Is there a light at 4:27 in the afternoon? And so we looked at, well, what does it mean? We did a little research around this. Again, Roy Walder came to me with this. I thought it was genius. Something called civil twilight, which essentially means there's enough ambient light that you don't need headlights, you don't need a flashlight, you don't need assistance. So generally, bottom line, unless there's a cloudy day, which we know changes things, of course, but on a typical day, typical kid, nobody would be waiting for a bus in the dark, and nobody would be getting home in the dark. And that was another objective of ours, as we were trying to put forward a scenario for consideration. So that's how we got to that. Let's just show you that they're all over town, as you know. This is kind of the running cumulative pickup times for kids. And it just, again, shows what I just said, which is here's our first pickup, right? Here's 7:23. All of these kids are picking up after that, and then they're dropping off 10 minutes, approximately, no earlier generally than 10 minutes before the start of the school day. So if it starts at 7:45, the bus is targeted to drop off at 6:35. one or two maybe a little before, one or two a little after, but this is how the time for pickup would roll. High school, challenge, of course, is you're dropping the little guys off, and then you have to get your buses all the way and just kind of go all throughout the 125 miles of roads again. When you have the high school as your first year, you can drop kids off 20 minutes before the start of the school day, 25 if you have to, in order to get your buses that have to go all the way out to the far side of town. And that, that's been done in different ways. You can't do that with our little guys, right, in the elementary. So this, again, it's 45 minutes. It's tight, but our modeling shows that we'll just make the 45 minutes. 741 would be the first pickup, which I think we would all agree is significantly different than 620. And it rolls up into our drop off here. And again, the high school is the 8:30 level. Pickup for our lower division in Saks. We start at 8:30, 8:27. And again, we drop off there for 9:15 start time. The other piece that I mentioned is sort of how long it takes to get kids home. And so our last tier is really where that matters. Again, you see the 3:45 bell time. The buses are out in the lot by 3:57. And how quickly we get everybody. So why does it cost what it does? There's some staffing requirements. We share staff right now. And we're anticipating that we're not going to be able to share those staff the same way because of the alignment of those elementary schedules and the way, so just the breakdown. We're just anticipating. So the 1.0 FTE there, which is for maybe some specials areas and to sort of fill the gaps. We have our in-house transportation, especially the white vans I talked about. We're aligning them, and we have some needs that are across, so like wheelchair van, for instance, things like that. So we need a couple more drivers to pull that together, and then supervisory needs whatever. And then, but the big cost is the 7 additional buses, because what we're doing is right now by going 2-2-2, we're pretty balanced in our 3 tiers. But when you have all 3 elementaries in the beginning, that's your largest tier. So you have to have enough buses to bring all those kids in. Gives us that a little bit excess capacity for the 5th, 6th, which helps to shorten their ride home. So there's a benefit there, and may be able to do some other things around after-school athletics. Why don't I just why don't I stop there? Put that up and just catch my breath. Maybe have a sip of coffee and see what questions, comments, thoughts. So anything that anybody's wondering or anything you wanted to share, that's what I'm here. But the coffee's still warm out.
Did you all at all look at whether 7 and 8 should go on tier 3 and make a decision to put them at tier 2? Or I'd love to hear a little bit.
Great question.
About
so
how that was decided.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we did look at it and said, well, what would it mean if we did this versus that? There are two big drivers in that. Okay. One is that we have over 400 students who ride on shared buses with 7, 8, and the high school. So there's 400 and change that ride on that. And so if we just anticipated to be the same, that's an awful lot of kids and a pretty significant sort of grade level difference between 5 and 6 and 9 through 12. And we've been doing the 7 through 12. So we've sort of normalized to that. But the 5 and 6 in with 9th and 10th, I was a high school principal for a decade. I like 7th and 8th better. But more importantly, in the system itself, because I do believe that people adjust and we can figure that out. But if you look at the system here, there are 2 transitions for kids and families as they go through, which is they would go from the first tier to the second tier. First tier to the 3rd tier, and then to the 2nd tier, where they would remain for the next 6 years. But if you flip 7, 8, 5, 6, you're actually adding another transition in. So in that scenario, they would go from the 1st tier to the 2nd tier to the 3rd tier, back to the 2nd tier. And I think that the number of transitions is important for kids, for health, for routines and all of that. And to be able to have our 7 through 12 on that same tier all the way through, I think is, and we've looked at, we've talked about as far as, so again, our purpose around student health and wellness seems to be a better system for kids. Now, one of the reasons we were really looking at it was around supporting our families and those that have kids in the elementary may be more likely to have kids at 5 and 6. So can you try to make those times closer to try to help them? What we've talked about is right now at our third tier, we have an early bird program, right, in East and West. We've got early birds that it's a self-sustaining program, so we don't make a profit on it. We just charge whatever we need to run it. And kids enroll, families enroll, and they come in early, and they stay with us and do things. We wouldn't need that obviously at East and West anymore, but we would need that at Saks. So we'd be creating an early bird program for 5th and 6th grade that would start about an hour or so before their school day would begin. So for those folks with younger kids, one of the thoughts is that they could be home to put their young children on the bus. And then if they're going to work, they can drop their child off at Saks for the early bird program and go from there. So we're trying to figure, we don't know what the demand or the interest in that's going to be. So if the board does continue and move forward, we'll be looking to sort of gauge people's need and interest around that. And so we can scale up to whatever it needs to be.
In this, obviously, tier 1's getting a big impact. That's what, and I have a 3-year-old, so I'm in the rare side. But I would be, what is the response from elementary school with the school change?
I think that, I think it's safe to say the response has been mixed across the board. And part of it is because we have 2 schools that are in the 3rd tier and another elementary school that's in the middle tier. So for some of the feedback from the folks in the middle tier saying it's a half an hour, we have more feedback this out. Others are saying it's a big change. There's a whole host of new problems I have to solve for. And I think that's the feedback from the staff too. They're saying, look, I've kind of built my life around this schedule, and now you're changing it, and it's a whole host of new problems to solve for. I guess there's some solace, and people have solved for that based on where their kids are. So the times aren't that different than what they are today. Other than 15 minutes, they're just different kids going at those times, right? So somebody said this the other day, you would experience those times with your children regardless, just at different ages, in a way, because we're still within that, that envelope, so to speak. But generally, it's been mixed. I mean, there's, when people look at their individual circumstance, some have said that this is better. Probably a few more at the elementary level have said that this is more challenging. But interestingly, and I do, for what it's worth, at least in public hearing, most of the folks began by saying, look, I agree that what we're doing isn't best. But I don't like this scenario. And that brings us back to, and that's why I spent a little bit of time talking about how we arrived here. I haven't done that part really publicly in a way because I'm not advocating, sir. I'm just trying to help make sure people understand why we're here. But I don't want people to think that there's another magical answer that nobody's thought about, other than teleportation or a monorail. I don't know what. There are hard constraints. So if you move the morning time, you have to move the afternoon. You just can't do it in less than 45 minutes. So that's why I want to share.
Because I'm assuming a lot of the feedback would be my feeling, and even what my son said, he's like, oh, look, we're sacrificing the little kids for us. Like that was his response, which I like the times, but I agree. I wish the 7:45 wasn't 7:45.
Right. We wish it was 8 o'clock. Yeah, we do. Yeah. But you just can't get there.
Right.
You can throw as many buses at it as you want.
But
if
I prioritize tier 2, the high school.
But if it's 8 o'clock, what happens? If you move that 15 minutes, then you're dismissing at 4 o'clock at the 5, 6. So it's just that much of a trade-off. It's minute for minute. And that's the balance that we try to strike in this. Now, you might say that's okay. We kind of talked it through and workshopped it and went through it and said, we don't think that's great. I think 4 o'clock is too late because then kids are getting home in the dark. And but that's the trade-off. So, agreed. Now, but if you put it up against what we have today, it's about the length of the bus ride. So if the youngest students had to get on the bus in the dark, it was a non-starter, which is why getting the first pickup after 7 was important.
I have 2 questions, and they're both about athletics, but you did say that 70% of students are involved in athletics. So I'm just curious, 2 questions. The first one is next year I'll have 2 hockey players. and I've been scheduling hockey for years, and there has never been ice at Darien Ice House after 3:50 in the afternoon. So I'm looking at this, and I'm just seeing 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. practices in my future next year, and kind of defeats the whole purpose of changing the start time if then everything's moving to the morning. So I would like to hear if any research has been done there, because I think that's really critical for the 90 kids who are playing hockey right now. My second question is SDAC on board with this? I have a golfer, and next year I'll also have a lacrosse player. Golf matches all start at 3 or 3:15. So I'm also seeing my kid having to miss 8th period every time there's a golf match. And most freshman lacrosse games, seems like they start at 4. If you're going to Greenwich and you have a 4 o'clock game, I'm also envisioning missing 8th period for a lacrosse player. So
Actually,
I'm wondering
Greenwich is easy,
if
because they start
FCAC is
late.
willing
Right.
to change all of their times to accommodate the changes that New Canaan's making. So the first one is hockey practices. The second
Sure.
one is FCAC on board with this? Because I hate to see children missing 8th period because FCAC is telling you that you need to be someplace at a certain time.
I'm going to answer them in the opposite order.
That's fine.
Okay, so on the FCI question, you mentioned Greenwich. Of course, Greenwich doesn't, their day goes till 3:15, so when we travel that's one of our further drives, but they're on a later schedule. Next year, in the FCI, it would be Greenwich, Wilton, Norwalk is changing their start times. I have from another superintendent that he's looking at moving it out half an hour. He thinks he's going to wind up doing that. I know Trumbull, others, are all looking at this to some degree. Now, there's turnover in a couple of those districts. Trumbull's hiring a new superintendent, other things like that, which might make it a year or two. But I do believe, and I'm seeing when I talk to my colleagues, that this is a conversation that many communities, and certainly most of the FCI, are engaged in. I do believe that we're going to see more and more districts shift over, as Norwalk is in next year, and as we look to do that. So I think that, so the start times.
I think that's really important, like engaging in the conversation is one thing, them willing to change the schedule is a different thing. I just hate to see kids, there's 70% of the kids at this school playing sports. I hate to see kids walking out of class
So do I.
after 7th period.
Yes.
I think that's something that needs to be affirmative to make this change, because it affects 70% of students at this school.
Well, and right, we can get into the specific numbers and things, but so the start time for games generally is 4 o'clock is what the FCA puts it at, but it is determined by the home team. We have the advantage of being pretty centrally located in the FCA, right? So probably, again, Greenwich is one of our furthest, and one going one way, but they already have a later start, that's an easier one. Trumbull is the other side, they're in the process of this discussion, don't know what we're going to wind up there. Another district is, again, it's a little bit further, it's closer than Trumbull, looking at making a half an hour shift. But it is determined in conversation between the teams. We're going to do all that we can to be sure that we're not pulling students out of school. Because I agree with you, I mean, this is our core work, we want them to be in class, and that is the goal.
Yeah.
And so we're going to work with our colleagues, and we're going to have those conversations. We're going to see what we need to do and can do, and pull it together. I mentioned before that we have the most buses we need are in the first tier of the runs, which means there could be opportunity to repurpose another bus that maybe isn't needed for the second or third tier to get the kids right at dismissal, get them out and get them going to some of the further rides instead of hitting into the classroom time. So it is something that we are looking at very closely. We're considering it. It is a part of the conversation. It has been from the beginning. In some districts where this hasn't really gone particularly smoothly, their process included sort of bringing in everyone who wanted to do it, closing the door, and then saying, let's do it. We have not taken that approach. Right? We've had everybody at the table all the time to share their perspective, their experience, their idea, and we've not been afraid of the people who say, look, this is going to cause problems, because we want to hear it now. So we've not, as a board, as a district, said, we're going to vote to change school start time, and then figured it out later, right? What we've really tried to do is do the research around if we should do it, but also if we did something we should do, what would it look like, so that we can have this conversation now instead of having this conversation in April or May, where you actually know what it means for you. Because we know families need time to plan, we need staff needs time to plan. what have you. Now, as far as the morning time goes, I've been in conversation with the board and with some folks in the schools, our administrators and others, and what we really talked about and what I would propose in this scenario is that we would not have anything that's regularly scheduled in the morning time, beyond once a week or however things go. Let me give you an example. So you mentioned hockey. So if we could get a sheet of ice in the morning, one morning a week on Wednesday morning, then that we may have to do that because it may not be
Well, they're
available.
doing that now, but my point is if you get out of the high school at 3 o'clock, there is no ice after 3:50.
So what are they doing now? So what are they doing
There is
now?
no practice.
I'm sorry.
Oh, right, so right now they practice from 2:50 to 3:50.
What about in the
Or
morning?
2:40 to 3:50, 5:30 to 6:30.
How often?
Pretty much one day a week.
Pretty much.
But my fear is, you can't, by the time you get to Darien High School, if you're getting out at 3 o'clock, you can get on the ice by maybe 3:30 if all goes smoothly, and they can be off at 3:50. So you're talking about 20-minute practice. I don't know if anybody's looked into this, spoken to Karen at Darien Ice House, but like I said, there is no ice after 4 o'clock, so that really means that kids are going to be practicing in the morning.
And so, and there are other places we have to look at and talk to and see if there's anything available anywhere else and try to go through it. That is a problem that we have to solve, to be blunt. I mean, it is. Is it a driver? Is it a constraint or a consideration? That's what we have to make the decision, right? If it's once a week, maybe it wouldn't have to be at 5:30. Maybe it would be at 6:30 since it's an hour later, and that might be a little bit better for kids. Those are the kinds of things that we would try to figure out. But the availability. So when I started talking about this about a year and a half ago, as we've gone through it, I'm talking about an ecosystem, right? So everything's interrelated to what we do now. And so one of the challenges when we make a change, and this is whole system change. I mean, this changes the times for every man, woman, and child associated with our schools. Right? Everybody's changing. So when you do that, it's that transition between kind of what we had that exists because of what we had. Now we have something new, but what we had before doesn't apply because the conditions have changed. So how do those things get adapted or changed or whatever in order to fit in this new ecosystem? That's the transition period. It's hard. People even say change isn't hard. It's transition that's hard. And so we're right now in a place where there are unanswered questions. I mean, and that uncertainty is challenging. But I can tell you, we're going to have hockey program. And we're going to figure it out. We have to figure it out. Don't know exactly what the answer is going to be, but it's if we do make this change, we've got to.
Do we have the answers? I mean, I don't really, personally this doesn't bother me, but it just bothers me from the standpoint, in the ways that it affects my children. So
Sure.
Are we going to have answers before you give people the opportunity to vote on this?
You're never going to answer it. I mean, it's really about is this the right thing based on what we know and where we are? And then there were going to be, actually the next step would be to put together an implementation committee that would include parents and staff, administrators and others to identify and work to resolve those questions and those problems that come up. I mean, it can't be prepackaged because there's so many variables. But, so that's where, and this is where, again, when I said we developed all these scenarios, we're trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to kind of figure out everything and do something that doesn't change anything, or minimizes all change for all people, it just doesn't exist, right? If you really go back to why are you doing this? So if it does move forward, that's where this group comes together and works together to solve it, and probably stays in place right through the year and continues to look at and identify issues as they arrive to sort of make this. I mean, trust me, if we do this, nobody wants it to go better than me. Right? This is a really important thing that impacts 10,000 people's lives. So I get the responsibility around that. Somebody said to me the other day, why? What are you doing? Like, your life would be so much easier if you didn't do this. I said, I get it. But we're driven by what we've learned and what we know. And so I do think it's my responsibility and the district's responsibility to bring forward what we believe to be the best scenario if we're going to make a change and then talk about it. So, yeah.
Dr. Letts, getting to your point about the start times and the school being at the center of the ecosystem, I'm assuming when you make this change, everything around it will likely shift. The time of preschool, YMCA schedules, dairy and ice rink times. If you're talking about 90 hockey players that might be affected, dairy and ice rink probably doesn't want to lose 90 customers. So they're probably going to figure that out, is what I'm guessing. And everything that's happening before and after school, I'm assuming, will shift so that people can still get their ice swim in and so forth and things. That's what I'm assuming. And
Yeah, that's how we've looked at it, and that's what people have shared. Again, we would do it purposefully, right? So we get a group together to do the outreach. So, for instance, I've spoken with Bill Kapp at Park and Rec and told him that this is a scenario that I'm going to bring forward. I talked to him in December, and after a conversation as we were going through, he said, look, we'll scale up to whatever you need. You know, we'll be there. Well, if you need after school, if you need before school at Saks, whatever you need, you know, we'll be there. Craig from the Y has been in our focus groups. He's been a part of the discussion, you know, right from the start. I've been talking to him. I call him, we talk, about me, we catch up, and he knows where we are with things. So people are thinking about if this shift were to occur, what would it mean? There are some other people, some can change in a short period of time, some can't, and some need more time. Those things, that's why it takes time to go through the transition. We have read a preschool over at West, right? So we can put that start time for that preschool where it makes the most sense. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll have a boosted enrollment.
This is a follow-up to the sports and FCAC question. Is
Sure.
that I know, and this is kind of my first time learning about all this. I have a freshman, but if there's anything to be communicated to them, and I know they have their scheduling challenges. But I was sitting in a lacrosse meeting last week, and I found it very disappointing that they had scheduled a playoff game or something on the same day as the ACT. My hope is that they're academic focused. Or, yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone gets their little strongholds, but if there's any comment back to them, I'm sure it's challenging dealing with these bodies. But if that's my feeling.
Sure.
Academics come first.
Totally could not agree with you more. I mean, I'm the superintendent of schools, right? This is what we do.
Yeah.
So sometimes they don't look laterally to see, like this is the best day of the calendar, so let's put it in there, and they don't even necessarily. Then I would be surprised if someone said, well, we have ACTs, but that doesn't matter. They stay in their lane. So yeah, we do. But we've had great success.
We've shifted times, like in homecoming even. We've had that on the day of an SAT. Realized it, shifted, moved the homecoming game back to make sure that we could accommodate the academics of our kids first.
Yeah, so I guess what we can control and work through locally when we're made aware of those things or other things happen, then we certainly adjust where we can, definitely. We're great partners with FCI. We really are. We've been very involved with them for a long, long time. A lot of respect for the folks that are there and do their work and give leadership positions throughout. So we have a great partnership. And we're proud members of the FCI, and I think we make them proud. I think that's pretty good.
If we went to something more flexible, like block scheduling or some kind of different schedule at the high school, would that help to get them out before 3 o'clock?
It certainly could, depending upon the scheduling, how it's built, and sort of what the students have, where their classes fall. Yeah, I know that work is underway in high school, and really, if we were to adopt this, every school really has to take a look at its master schedule and make adjustments. All our elementary schools would change, the middle school would change, so they'd each be putting a team together to, or if they don't have one already, to do that work. But that, I think, the bigger point is
eliminating a free period and then they can get out at 2 o'clock, right? Does everybody have a free period in high school?
depends on the schedule and sort of how it all falls. But I think your bigger point, which I appreciate, is that when you make a shift like this, we think about loss and what's going to change and what the detriment can be. There will be opportunities that we just don't know about yet, as we continue to develop it and look at it. I do think that I know, for instance, of a district out west that has an 8:30 start time and a block schedule, and they allow students to opt not to have a first period or a last period, in their 8 periods that they schedule on any given day, like an A day or a B day. And they've done that with great success. So, yeah, there are ways that schedules can be complementary of whatever it was.
What sort of metrics, or how would you know that it's worth it ultimately? Is there some kind of a survey or something that, or a timeline where you're gonna say, okay, we've done all this, is it better? Because right now we're at the top of the list, so academically, obviously you don't want to go any, you don't want to, you see it's not working if you start dropping, but
Right.
what
Well, we go to number 2.
Yeah.
Don't kill me.
Yeah. No, but
Your point is very well taken.
Yeah, but
So
what
are we solving for as far as like what?
how do you know? How do you
So-
know you've done what you wanted to
It's
do?
very difficult to quantify, in part because, and that's why this is actually a good conversation to roll in with the other piece, because our students are doing very well by those quantitative measures, right? When we look at them in comparison to our JERG and to others. Now granted, those are in comparison, a lot of them have the earlier start time, but we've been working with a group. Hanover administered a couple of surveys. So Dr. Carenti and I feel as we've been working with them to say, what else? What other measures can we find? And we're actually we're looking at a couple of different measures that we may wind up surveying the kids before we actually do anything. We collect school climate data regularly. That's another measure that we can try to do something with. But internally, we think about things like our mental health referrals, kids in crisis, kinds of things that happen, and some other pieces that sort of happen around if the research bears out that making shit like this allows students to get more sleep, which helps them to make better decisions, be more mentally healthy and emotionally healthy, then we should see a decrease. And in truth, it's been on the rise all throughout the region and all throughout the state and country. So if we can bend that curve, that's a win.
I just want to say thank you for considering this at all. I know you get a lot of criticism from a lot of people because change is difficult. And it's going to be a change for us, for our family as well. My kids have different sleep patterns at different ages, etc. And I'm just glad that you look at this from a perspective of what is best for most. Looking at research and basing your decisions on a lot of different conversations you're having. It's not just for one single family here or there. It's for a large amount of kids over a longer period of time. So I can consider it what's best for us.
After the article, maybe just one assessment.
I'm just wondering when a final decision will be made or communicated. So there's the Board of Ed vote next week.
Right, so the Board of Ed on Monday night, or Tuesday night, the 21st, will make the decision around, and I do, just to share, the Board of Ed has been so actively engaged in learning and hearing, and Carlson came in as we were talking, been at the meetings, and then, also, sort of kudos to them. Very engaged and really open to hearing feedback. So they'll make that decision on the 21st whether or not to adopt a budget with this in it. And then if that happens, then my next step would be to meet with the chairs of the town boards, the Board of Finance, the Town Council, Board of Selectmen, and share with them both sort of the thinking and where we are and how we got here and all that's happening, and the need to plan. Because for certainly our parents, our kids, our staff, we've got staff with healthcare needs for their own children. Daycare, thank you. It's getting to be a little long. Daycare needs other things. So we want to know as early as possible if, where they are, if they're able to, affirm that the budget would not. We're coming in at a good number. And so really the decision is on the merits of the idea. And I think that that's a really important distinction as we think and talk about this. Now, we'll talk with them a little bit about future costs and what it means and how it all sort of comes together. And that's a good conversation to have. But my hope would be that we would have some pretty confident directionality soon after the 21st. And we would look to put our committee together and start planning the implementation and all that right then. There's, for us, the planning. The worst case would be, we're getting things planned and whatever, and then there's a seismic shift that we didn't expect, and we have to sort of catch our breath. But we want to be ready if it does move forward. So I can't be more specific than that right now. We're in the process, but.
Haven't sat through many of your budget meetings. Very interesting. Usually it seems like the benefits for the teachers, or for all staff, grows every year. And this year it shrunk. which is an amazing thing. So I'm wondering, how did you accomplish that? And then, does it come back next year and have the $1 million plus cost plus another growing
Sure.
benefit cost?
So our insurance consultant, Joe Spurgeon, spent an hour sort of going through all this with the board on Monday night as far as where we are in projections and things, and I'm not going to have to go through all of that, but I'm going to give the shortest answer I can, but I'm glad to talk more about this. Just like I mentioned operational cost drivers and how we look to sort of manage all of that. And I'm doing a slide on this, I might. Let me just see so I have a visual to be sure that I'm. Okay. So a couple of things. So the 21% or 81% is salary benefits, right? So the benefits cost is a big cost. So we're a self-insured system. So we don't hire somebody Cigna or whatever to manage it. We're self-insured, means we hold our reserves, we manage the money, we manage our plan, and we do what we need to do. So the Cigna is our third-party administrator, but we make those sort of decisions on it. Essentially what we had in the benefits, we've had significantly improved performance as far as our claims experience goes. And your claims works on 18 to 24 month sort of rolling basis. If you have very good experience and you're rolling off very poor experience, that helps to bring down the number. But what's driving that, in part we believe, and this is what our consultant confirmed, is over the last 6 years, we've migrated 100% of our employees to a high deductible plan. A high deductible plan is significantly less expensive than a PPO, which is what they were on before. So this year was the last group in our custodians, we moved them over. Last year, we moved over all of our TAs and our non-certified, our secretaries. A couple of years before that, we finished moving over our teachers. So we've been in this sort of migration out of a PPO into the high deductible. And that brings down your base, your costs. Now, there's going to be fluctuation in insurance. We're self-insured, so one person, one bad thing that happens could cost us $300,000. Because then we're reinsured on that, and that's where I'll lose you, so I'm definitely not going there. But that resetting of the base by making that the migration has made a big difference. Matter of fact, we have a sheet that Joe shared that I'll put up, make sure it's on the website if you'd like to learn more, and it goes into kind of some cost mitigation strategies that we've used over the last number of years. Okay? So what happens when you have significantly improved claims and when you're self-insured is we had budgeted for this number and we built our reserve for that number. And the reserve is the amount that we need to keep in case we go over what we anticipate until we get to our reinsurance on that level. So you have a reserve based on that amount. Now, as that comes down, you have savings in what you have to spend for your plan itself, and then you also have resources that you don't need to fill that corridor. You have more than you need to fill that corridor between anticipated claims and reinsurance. That gets smaller because the total number is smaller, and that's a percentage on that number. We've done things also like we've improved the amount by over $100,000 for our prescription drug rebates. We've done things like changing the plan design. We have something in our plan that no other district has yet, I assume that they probably will, which is if you have a high deductible plan here in the public sector, generally when you go through your deductible, then everything else is covered 100%. And what that does essentially is remove consumerism from your thinking when you just go and do whatever. What we've done is negotiate in a 90-10 copay after the deductible's met, where we'll pay 90% out of the plan, but they'll pay 10%. And we find that's an attempt to try to keep consumerism in the plan. But just that alone factors in about a 3% savings year over year to our anticipated costs. Over time, the HSA migration, since we started, has saved over $10.5 million for the plan, for what the cost would be if we hadn't done it. So those are I can get a lot more technical. I'm not going to go to. I'm going to put the sheet up, and if you have any questions, you can call me or email me or let me know, and I'm glad to go into more detail. But the last question is, sustainability. So some of these things that we've done have brought down our costs, and while there's always going to be fluctuation, we don't think that what we had before was our base. We think we would kind of reset it based on where we are now that 100% are in the HSA. So that's a really good thing. goes up, then yeah, we'll have to spend more. We get a really great experience, it could go down, and maybe not. So we don't know that. There is some of a gap that would have to be made up for, but it's not $900,000. And we're looking at, again, it's big things, little things, like food service is putting in $200,000 towards their insurance. Before that, it was 100% covered by the district. But when you have a self-op like we do, you want it to be self-sufficient. So it's like little things, big things that all sort of contribute in. And that, again, is a recurring investment into it. So we anticipate that would sustain. I just said it's your I do, but I love this stuff. Thank you. It's getting late. I'd be here if you have any other questions, but certainly thank you so much for coming out. I'll put the presentation and other stuff on the website. Take a look. Let me know. Really glad to be engaged in the conversation, and thank you for coming out today.
Thank you.
Thank you.